In the aftermath of the recent escalation, one of the most notable moments came when Qatar delivered a powerful address at the United Nations Security Council. The speech, delivered in a calm yet firm tone, opened with traditional blessings before moving straight into the gravity of the situation. What made this address stand out was not only its sharp criticism of Israel's attack, but also its focus on mediation, diplomacy, and the responsibility of the international community. In many ways, it was both a defense of Qatar's sovereignty and a reminder of its unique role as a mediator in conflicts that have shaped the region for decades. The statement began with a gesture of respect toward the Security Council president and a note of appreciation for the countries that supported Qatar's requests to convene the meeting, including Algeria, Pakistan, Somalia, the UK, and France. This diplomatic framing served as a reminder that Qatar is not isolated, but backed by an alliance of nations willing to stand against violations of international law. The acknowledgement of Rosemary DiCarlo, Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, further highlighted Qatar's commitment to multilateral processes. The technical core of the speech centered around the Israeli strike on Doha on September 9, 2025, which Qatar described as an unjust and deliberate attack. The detail that the bombing targeted a residential area specifically allocated for negotiating teams was a critical revelation, by highlighting that these residences were widely known to diplomats, journalists, and officials engaged in talks. Qatar painted the incident as not just an attack on its sovereignty, but an assault on diplomacy itself. The loss of life, including the young security officer, Arif Bedo, Saad Mohammed Adosi, added a human dimension that made the tragedy more tangible to listeners, while the injuries to civilians and internal security personnel underlined the reckless disregard for human safety. The design of the speech itself was carefully structured. It moved from factual recounting of the attack to broader implications for international peace and security. Qatar framed the event not as an isolated military strike, but as part of a dangerous trend of Israeli actions driven by extremism and impunity. The comparison with the Taliban's political bureau in Doha and the successful negotiations that ended the war in Afghanistan in 2020 was a deliberate performance element, reminding the world that mediation works when respected. By citing U.S. cooperation under Donald Trump at that time, Qatar appealed to global powers by referencing a precedent that ended a decades-long conflict without targeting negotiators or mediators. The uniqueness of the statement lay in its ability to weave together moral authority, legal arguments, and historical examples. Qatar positioned itself as a peace broker under siege, insisting that its humanitarian and diplomatic efforts would continue despite aggression. It highlighted its tangible achievements, such as the release of 148 hostages and the delivery of aid to Gaza as proof that dialogue, not force, produces real results. These performance aspects gave credibility to its words, making it harder for critics to dismiss its position as mere rhetoric. The speech also took a strong stance against Israel's leadership, calling them extremists who operate with arrogance and impunity. This language was unusually direct in the restrained setting of the Security Council, a deliberate choice to underline the urgency and seriousness of the threat, by arguing that the attack not only endangered Qatar but also any state engaged in mediation. Qatar effectively widened the circle of concern, urging other nations to see themselves as potential targets. If such behavior goes unchallenged, one of the standout design elements of the address was its balance between warning and hope. While it condemned Israeli actions in strong terms, it also reaffirmed Qatar's commitment to peace, international law, and the two-state solution. This duality ensured that the speech was not only defensive but also forward-looking, presenting Qatar as a constructive player even in the face of aggression. The appeal to the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and humanitarian law tied the speech firmly to the United Nations Charter, giving it weight beyond regional politics. Qatar's insistence that peace begins with a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and the lifting of the blockade on Gaza offered a clear roadmap rather than vague calls for calm. This practical approach distinguished the address from many others that often dwell on generalities. It was, in effect, a performance of leadership in Qatar, as a nation that not only condemns injustice, but also proposes actionable steps toward resolution. The unique selling point of this statement is its blend of vulnerability and strength. Qatar portrayed itself as a victim of aggression, yet simultaneously as a resilient state determined to continue its role as a mediator. By referencing international law and past diplomatic successes, it reminded the world that small states can play outsized roles in peacebuilding when backed by principles and persistence. The ability to turn a tragic attack into an opportunity to call for global solidarity and renewed commitment to peace is what made this address resonate. In the bigger picture, this speech was less about assigning blame and more about testing the credibility of the international system. Qatar made it clear that silence or inaction would only embolden further violations, while collective action could reinforce trust and diplomacy. Its closing appeal to optimism and the two-state solution was not just symbolic but strategic, grounding the call for peace and a vision of coexistence that remains the only viable path forward.